Hello everyone, this episode examines the lasting damage being done by the previous majority and how it's costing the district hundreds of thousands of dollars. You may be familiar with the term waste, fraud, and abuse of late. It's to lying electeds what Dubai chocolate is to people on social media. All the rage. Need more proof? Look no further than waste, fraud, and abuse personified.
So there's nothing like waste, fraud, abuse, any of that we need.
Majority of Youngblood, Blades, and Fraser was running up a tab of waste, fraud, and abuse in our district. Now the checks are coming due. Literally. Back in January, we highlighted Richard McAlinden's lawsuit, which argued that Alex Chernis cultivated a culture of abuse in the district. In his lawsuit, McAlinden stated on November 30th, 2023, Chernis said he, quote, did not care if a student hits, kicks, or punches a staff member. It is part of their job, and it is your job as principals to make them understand that. This attitude contributed to a hostile work environment, leading to McAlinden's resignation. It was scheduled to go to trial, but the district settled in the amount of $300,000. Let's not forget who the frauds were in the majority during this time, or the failure to do their duty has wasted $300,000 of taxpayer money, not including legal fees. Waste, fraud, and abuse was there the whole time, but they did nothing about it. In fact, they sowed it, and taxpayers and students are reaping. Now we have 2 more lawsuits in the pipeline, both of which indicate more fraud and abuse during this reign of error. Lawsuit number 2 is from Tom Craig, who was the district's crisis coordinator for 25 years. When tragedy struck the lives of students or schools, Tom was the point man to lead them through this crisis. He alleges that he was placed on leave on November 29, 2023, and then cleared a little over a week later. However, he remained on leave and the district began attempting to negotiate his retirement. He also claims that he was told he was being assigned to Valadez Middle School as a, quote, middle school, college, and career counselor, a position that didn't exist, as retaliation for speaking up. What's that word when you try to sell someone on something that isn't real?
Fraud.
We're glad you agreed, Leandra. He was eventually forced from the district due to the hostile environment that flourished under Chernis and the axis of malice, Youngblood, Blades, and Fraser. Craig filed his lawsuit on July 24th this year, another lawsuit brought on by Chernis's mismanagement and the former majority's complicity. Even though Alex is gone, he's still costing us, and more taxpayer funds will be wasted fighting and possibly settling this lawsuit. Lawsuit 3 was filed by Beth Scott, who was working as a counselor on special assignment. In July 2022, before Chernis, Scott reported concerns about the misuse of CTE, Career and Technical Education grant funds, being used to pay for positions outside the scope of the grant, to her direct supervisor, Gina Aguilar. This would be an illegal use of funds. When Aguilar failed to take action, Scott went to Dr. Linda Adamson, Assistant Superintendent of Ed Services, in spring 2023. Ultimately, Scott went to Superintendent Mike Matthews. As a result, Matthews and another executive board member were placed on leave and denied access to their email or any other school campus. This eventually led to Chernis becoming superintendent in PYLUSD. Later, Scott met with Christina Michelle, a director in the business department, again reporting concerns about the misuse of funds. Less than 48 hours later, she was called into a meeting with Assistant Superintendent of Human Services Nancy Blade, who reprimanded Scott for her concerns about misappropriation of funds, questioning Scott's motives and stating it was, quote, a bad look for someone with aspirations. Sounds a little like abuse, there's that word again, of power. No? In July 2023, under the Chernis regime, Scott reached out to Olivia Young to address the continued issue regarding the grant funds. However, Young was, quote, unwilling to acknowledge the possibility that there was an issue. Despite Young's statements, the district adjusted funding sources, which seems to indicate the funds were being misused. In March 2024, Nancy Blade told Scott she was being demoted from her position back to school counselor and scheduled to meet with Chernis's hand-picked, unqualified sycophant, Isaac Gates. Except, he bailed on the meeting and left Nancy Blade to give Scott a letter stating she was being reassigned and would be notified of her new position by June 30th, 2024. On June 26, 2024, Scott met with Gates, who informed her that the next day would be her last. Scott reiterated Gates' letter stating, in writing, she'd have a job the following year. However, Gates told her she was wrong, even as he read the letter aloud with his assurance of a future position. According to Scott, Renee Gray, also in attendance, quote, visibly reacted, while Gates read the letter contradicting himself, and she acknowledged this discrepancy between Gates' new position and what he'd previously written. This is the same guy whom Blades, Fraser, and Youngblood gave a raise to just a few months into his tenure without an evaluation. More money wasted. If only there were someone on the board who was good at advising how money should be spent. Say, an accountant? Awkward. Scott filed her lawsuit on June 6 this year, citing breach of employment, breach of good faith, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of labor code for whistleblowing, completing a trifecta of suits that paint a consistent picture of waste, fraud, and abuse left unchecked by a rogue superintendent and willing accomplices in the majority of Blades, Frazier, and Youngblood. The worst part being, they aren't the ones who ultimately pay. It's taxpayers, parents, employees, and, most importantly, students who pay the price for their malicious incompetence.